crowd of people purred in the arch, and the one standing in front said that the elf would go with them. Ramon said with a grin that he would take the slave to Hariel. Master. Siren frowned. Trix people entered the courtyard of the inn. The boy stepped forward and asked who they were. Closing his eyes, the scoundrel said that he didn't even think that someone would come to help. They had already taken the nest for emirs, to which the young priest reminded him that it was said that the elf was not for sale. Why this coercion? The man grabbed the sword and swung it at the boy, yelling that he was incredibly loud for such a snot. But the warrior parried the blow with her dagger. Then she cut the attacker's throat, and the rest of the fighters immediately rushed at her. But she easily slipped between the attackers. With a cold look, the elf attacked the men. Roman's face was distorted with anger. He wondered how the slave dared. Looking at the girl's figure, he thought that she was very strong. At this time, the saint folded his hands in a prayer gesture and loudly called out 2 deer fillets, so that she would crush these enormouses with her iron rod. The next moment, the warrior had to save the boy from an attack. A sword stuck into Atri. He looked at the weapon in horror while the leader of the squad who threw it clarified that if the pilgrim dies, no one will blink an eye, right? The saints. The face was distorted with anger, but the girl stopped him. And when he asked what this freak was talking about, she said that everything was fine. The elf moved forward, twirling a dagger in her hands, and Selin called her name. She pointed the dagger at the enemies, and with a confident smile, she said that it was not a problem. The man clenched his teeth. Turning around, he said that Tata had to get to work. A tall orc approached Ramon. The warrior narrowed her eyes. The orc warrior said that he was working and would catch the elf. Looking gloomily at the warrior, the orc apologized, explaining everything by such fate, essentially offering Torzine herself to it. Looking gloomily at the new opponent, Siren figured that he was much stronger than these people. Would she be able to handle it? The warrior rushed forward, and the owner reminded him not to even think about damaging the goods, to which he replied that he would not, and would simply grab her. The girl covered herself with Adager from the first blow, and her eyes widened when the enemy abruptly changed the trajectory of the attack. At the last moment, the elf dodged the sword. The blade formed vortices of wind. Gritting her teeth, the warrior realized thought the enemy was indeed strong. Trying to attack the orc, the girl realized that she should not have left the Saber in the room. She tried to attack from above in a jump, but the enemy covered himself with a blade. Ramon became furious and shouted, "What is the warrior doing? Couldn't he even cope with an elven girl?" Frowning, the big guy concluded that it seemed that today he would not be allowed to eat again. Leaving dents in the pavement, the orc furiously attacked the girl. She clenched her teeth again. The warrior swung his sword. The elf looked at him amazingly. The big guy was confused. The girl ran right under the blade, resolutely looked at the enemy, while the blade was lowered on her. Her gaze seemed icy. The orc realized that the warrior was not dodging. Perhaps something was wrong here. The big guy had to abruptly take the weapon away, and a smile flashed across the warrior's face. Then she struck his neck with a dagger, gritting his teeth. The warrior realized he had almost killed her and tried to figure out what she would have done if he hadn't changed his trajectory. And the elf thought she believed he would make it in time. Saren turned around when she heard the boy scream, asking if she could block throne blades, and she answered that she probably could. Putting his hands together again in prayer, the saint shouted that he believed in her. Ramon swung his throwing knife, cursing at the boy. The weapon flew at the young priest, and the man reminded him that he had told him to stand still. But an elf flew out in front of the praying Silin. She blocked the flying dagger with her own. At that moment, the figure of his deity appeared above the priest's figure, while he asked Saint Felinans to crush these bastards with all her might. Throwerir opened her mouth. However, the villain did too. An iron rod fell right on the opponents. The blow raised a cloud of dust over the courtyard of the inn. The boy ran, shouting that, although divine power was meant to fight Demonsand, the living dead, it would help them buy time, which meant they had to run quickly. And the elf understood. Grabbing the saint by the belt, she called his name. Then she threw the dagger. The blade pierced the wall. Throughorir's foot rested on the blade. Then she used it as a springboard for a jump. Pressing the boy to herself, the elf jumped into the window, breaking the glass. Pointing his finger at the window, the villain ordered Talcat to quickly follow. Then the man turned around when he asked if they had screwed up again. Because of one elf, they had caused such a rout, to which the leader of the squad justified himself by saying that she was stronger than he thought. The old man grinned and noted that even Tal had failed to grab the girl, how the slave had fought on equal terms with an experienced orc warrior. Sir Lantis placed his hand on the hilt of his sword and concluded that it was his turn, and asked where the target had disappeared to. As soon as the scoundrel pointed in the direction, the swordsman immediately lit up. He quickly soared into the air. Soon the end of his scarf disappeared into the broken window. Ramon watched the warrior go. His face looked surprised because his ally had risen so high into the air with just one jump. While the old man looked around the corridor and muttered that they had missed him, the squad leader managed to remember that he had an aura. The swordsman smiled, muttering that the dear slave could hide as long as she wanted. At this time, Siren and her companion ran along another corridor. The couple ran along the corridor. Selling glanced at Cirrus and said that they needed to go back to the room for equipment. The elf replied that they were probably waiting there. The guy frowned and said that they could handle 1 or 2 nights. It was still better than running around with a single blade. Cirrus looked at the guy and mentally said that at first he seemed like a naive child to her. One of the warriors stood at the door. The elf was above Jimin. An instant, she kicked him in the face. When the girl put on her cloak, Selin immediately scolded her, telling her that they did not have time to change. The priest used purification magic on the room, erasing all traces. Lantis walked down the corridor. Thanks to his aura, he could see the entire area. He was a swordsman who had reached certain heights in fencing and owned an aura. Kicking the door with his foot, the man asked himself, was that child really capable of erasing traces of presence like a high-ranking priest? The swordsman entered the room. Looking at the window, he said that the children had escaped after all. Raman, sweating heavily, asked the warrior if he had really let the fugitives escape. The man closed his eyes and smiled, saying that they couldn't have gone far, so Hesselt let the dogs go. The events take us to the streets of the city. Cirrus, looking around, asked if it wouldn't be better to get lost in the crowd. The priest answered by saying that they should avoid people as much as possible, because no one would help slaves running away from their owners. Sweating and breathing heavily, Silin mentally said that even the Holy Order wouldn't help them. Now he understood why the pilgrims were dying like flies. The guy gritted his teeth, realizing that if he returned now, he would again be in her power, and he would never return with such a miserable body. Raising his hands, Silin wed, saying that if Mr. Reffenhart were here, everything would have been resolved already. The elf heard him and asked incredulously, was the master really that strong? Silin did not answer. He folded his hands together and began to read a prayer. The feathers of fate began to swirl around the guy. A moment later, mana rushed along the walls of the buildings due to the use of the Fork of Fate. Love is able to forge fate from chance. A chance meeting becomes destiny. A man meets a woman and says that their meeting is like a miracle. In the end, they get married. This is destiny. The probability of chance may be extremely small, but with a blessing, it becomes destiny, even a kiss. Selin opened his eyes and looked sadly at the sky. This spell was intended to find suitable couples, but now they had a different goal. Turning to the elf, the guy said that she was very strong. He had only seen an elf killer once, but she was much stronger. The girl responded by saying that he was no slouch either. He was already a saint of the highest rank at such a young age. The priest stood in a stupor, looking at the girl's back, Heffled, as if he was talking not to a slave, but to an ordinary person. Could Saris be special? Looking around the buildings, the elf asked if they had come to where they needed to. The priest answered by saying that the thread breaks here. Suddenly both of them turned around wearily. Right in front of them was a figure of a knight. Sir stepped forward saying that it was not Mr. Reifenhart. Lantis grinned and said that he had finally caught the children, and thanks to them, he had warmed up well. Starting to approach them, the man said that they better not try to escape. Cirrus rushed forward, realizing that if they ran, they would expose their backs. All she could do was strike the enemy down and quickly get away from here. Lantis easily dodged her sword. Finding himself behind the girl, he said that she had good skills, and she was quite talented. Cirrus delivered a roundhouse kick. Her enemy moved and said that she seemed to have worked very hard to achieve such success, which was unusual for a slave. The elf looked at him, not understanding who her enemy was. The priest began to read a prayer, realizing that their enemy, being so strong, was very famous in the world of knights and swordsmen. But he did not understand why such a person would get involved in dirty deeds. The sword in the girl's hand glowed thanks to the blessings. Lantis was surprised and said that only a bishop could use so many sacred spells, not a high-ranking priest. Raising his hands, the priest said that Vasile was very famous in the south, and now Sir Cirrus would deal with him. Dodging each attack, the man said that with the priest's blessing, she had changed beyond recognition. Suddenly, Cirrus's sword split into two. Her eyes and mouth opened wide at the sight of the broken sword. Lantis struck with his sword, saying that she had gotten too carried away while he was playing with them. The priest froze in horror. He saw an aura around the man. Lantis himself, putting his sword in its hith, said that he could not even think that the orb would force him to use an aura. The guy gritted his teeth, not understanding what the swordsman with the aura had forgotten here. Ramon approached the knight with a smile and asked if he had caught everyone. Theprius, who had picked up the elf in his arms, cried out upon hearing the knight's name. Lanthas, this bearded man, was a famous knight in the kingdom of Tan. He was the heir of a noble family who showed amazing military prowess, awakening an aura after years. However, Lanthas kept a secret that he could not share. He was sweating after the trial. The man had a terrible fetish, which appeared with the elf's slaves and even extended to royalty, and then was inevitably revealed in secular society. The priest screamed in horror, saying that it turns out that the monster was sitting in the Principality of Chetan. The man grinned and said that he was very famous. Silim replied, saying Thath naturally knew him because he was told many times that if he walked at night, he would be captured by Lanthas. Lan then grinned, saying that he was just working off his salary and he killed hundreds of elves in Tan and then fled here. Silen gritted his teeth. Ramon walked up to the man with a smile on his face. From the merchant union's point of view, the knight's dishonor was nothing compared to the benefits that the Aura Lords gave them. In years, Therafane Merchant Union had become the second largest in the Chan Principality, and this was thanks to Lantis, who extended his hand. He hit various points on the priest's body, saying that he knew what a high-ranking priest could do if he was allowed to speak freely. Ramon was wary and said that he could not harm the elf. Otherwise, the master would be dissatisfied. Lowering his hand, Lantis said that they could just hire a priest and heal her. Looking at the trembling priest, he said that he also looked cute, so he would take him along. Silen jumped up and shouted, saying that he was a guy. Stroking his collar and smiling, Lantis said that this would be a very unusual experience, but he would take care of him. Ramon extended his hand to the priest. A moment later, he pulled his hand back because of the wound. Lantis, stroking his beard, was surprised. Looking at Silen, who had stood up, he asked how he had stood up without treatment since his tendons must have been torn. Apparently, he was the most beautiful, fragile, and trembling boy in the world. Silen sweated profusely in horror when the knight said that they would have to cut off his small legs. Suddenly, the wall behind him collapsed with a roar. Silen immediately turned around. The protagonist walked through the smoke, saying that he had finally found the bastards. Clenching his fist and getting angry, he asked how they dared to treat Cirrus like that. Streams of air came through the hole in the wall.